Thank you, Rasmus. That was mainly the main instructions now, and I can give you the floor.
Thank you, Diego. So now we're starting up, and everything will be recorded, what you say and what you ask. So people in the Americas can also see what's going on. As I said before, we have a group of great experts on how to get the culture and creative industries on the political agenda. I will give the floor to Ragnar Seal. Ragnar Seal used to be head of the Ministry of Culture in Estonia. Not the minister himself, but right underneath. And he's now one of the founders of Creativity Lab in Estonia, and also a good friend, a good advisor on everything that has to do with the culture and creative industries. Ragnar, the floor is yours to guide us through the next hour or so.
Very good. Thank you, Rasmus. It's such a pleasure to see so many friendly faces this morning hour here all over the world. I see people from Colombia to Malta, and even people sitting next door. So welcome. Really, we have a short time, so let's be to the point as Diego was instructing us. What we are so lucky today to have are experts in front of you who are not only theoretically going to explain their views on how to get creative industries in the government's agenda, but who have actually in their respective countries done so. So I urge you to take notes. I know that some of you in your countries, because we work together quite a long time, have managed to do so quite successfully, and some of you are still struggling. Already back 8 years ago, when I was chairing the European Union expert group on creative industries, and when we did a mapping of the creative industries policy scene in Europe, we saw a strange picture. The rules should apply to everyone. The conditions should be within European Union pretty much the same, but we saw that countries in European Union are in a very, very different footing. Some of them not only recognize the importance of creative industries, but as Rasmus was saying in the question in the very beginning, have really placed creative industries in quite high in their political agenda. In some countries, people know about it, they do some studies, they are just scratching the surface. And then there were countries that have done very little or almost nothing at all. So why in some countries, the awareness, the readiness to deal with creative industries is so much higher than another? That's the key question today. And Rasmus was phrasing the question this morning, how to place creative industries on top of the government agenda. I understand that this is very ambitious plan. I think that for most of us around today's webinar, it's not a question how to place the creative industries on top of the agenda, but how to place it in an agenda, even in the middle, even in the very low, but at least in the agenda in the first place. Anyway, we start with our experts, their interventions. If you have questions, as Diego was mentioning, please do send your questions also in written form. We are monitoring them as they come in, and we will ask our experts those questions as time comes. We start with Colombia. We start with Felipe. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Rasmus. Greetings to everybody. I guess the first part is it's communications. Getting to get a message across is probably the most challenging thing you can do in public policy. And there you have to be very creative sometimes. Of course, you have to be familiar with your surroundings, your political system, and the main actors. But that alone is not going to get you very far. I mean, that can probably give you an opportunity here or there, but you have to make sure that you can express what is necessary to be done in a creative way, in a way that engages people, that mobilizes people, that makes people imagine a future. Otherwise, it's very difficult to raise attention towards the creative industries and make change happen. In our case, what we did at some point, I was very lucky to meet a guy in the IDB several years ago, and the guy happens to be today's president of Colombia. But in the process, what we did was to try to understand what it makes so hard for people who are not creative industries enthusiasts, people who are not open-minded economists or alternative policymakers, to understand the dynamics and the importance of the creative industries. So we took the risk of writing a book in a very unlikely fashion, breaking up paragraphs, just sending small lines and messages, connecting the dots and leaving the reader to use its imagination and in a way complete the book. That helped a lot to raise awareness about the creative industries. We found that it was a very successful initiative, and after that we created kind of a movement without wanting to do so. And that group of enthusiasts today is the core of us being able to present policy, to push for reforms, finding a crowd that is willing to spread the message and help with the political system to move forward, because it's very difficult to change the mind of bureaucrats, but it's close to impossible to change the mind of politicians. So having a crowd and that helps is very important, and I think that has been a very special thing we have achieved. The book is called The Orange Economy. You can find it easily on the internet, and probably if you have not read it, once you open it, you will realize why it's special in terms of making people, if not agreeing with you, at least give you the chance. And I think because of that, we have been able to push a very aggressive agenda in terms of reforms. And from that standpoint, it's very weird when you're in policy making and something starts moving fast. Actually, you get scared because then you realize you are making changes that are important, that can affect thousands of people, if not millions. But it's very rewarding, and it's very important that if you want to keep your ideas honest, you take the time to write them down, express them, and communicate them.
Thank you, Felipe. Can I quickly ask you also a follow-up question? Now, your book, The Orange Economy, the Economía Naranja, has really
very good Spanish.
Has become really a phenomenon, not only in Colombia, but also in Latin America and in other countries. What we've seen in other countries is that a lot of focus in the very first steps in this process is placed on raising awareness, building the alliance, kind of champions around the theme, convincing people. Now, you've done this, incredibly. How do you then, if this has happened, translate the awareness and the inspiration that you've created into actions, into tangible? Because you have an example with Colombia being one of the few countries in the world with a law on creative industries or law on orange economy. How do you do that? What are the first few steps there?
Well, you have to, of course, try to turn the ideas into alliances, as you have mentioned. And in that sense, you have to mobilize people. In a way, you are kind of a political entrepreneur. You have to sell the idea. You have to connect with people that sometimes you are not familiar with. You have to reach out across the alley, find political allies in other parties, but also to kind of make an undefined alliance with people, with entrepreneurs, with academics, and you have to understand that many are not going to agree with you, and the way you approach the topic, but many share with you the ambition of making creative economy happen as a policy. So there you have to start in a way negotiating with yourself and opening up your mind and making concessions, not in the sense that you are renouncing what you believe, but in the sense that you understand that there are way many interests that you have to take into account. Once you do that, of course, it's very important to have leadership. In the case of Colombia, we have been very, very lucky that my co-author, President Iván Duque, was then senator as well. And as senator, he was very skilled at making this alley crossing and talking to other parties and other people with other ideas, and bringing together most of what makes actually sense. Even if they are not your core ideas, you can respect them because of their virtues, and also include them into the policy. At the end, a political process is a construction and negotiation process, and you have to be very open to that. And then, of course, is you have to turn that leadership and those alliances into action. So you have to go and understand that you are always looking for the best, right? You want to everything to be perfect. Well, sometimes the best is an enemy of the good. So you have to make sure that instead of waiting to have the perfect law or the perfect policy, to have a law that is good enough to make change happen, and then you take on and keep trying to improve as you go, and as you add allies and partners and sometimes even enemies. They keep you honest, so you should not disregard the value of the people that disagree with you, and to keep constant contact with them. So you start by then, and then you have to start replicating what you did outside of government within the government. So you find the allies in the bureaucracy that will make all your dreams become through programs and projects. So always keep in mind an open mind, an ability to keep learning from others, but also never surrendering your core objective of making your society a society that places culture and creativity in the center.
So basically what we just heard was a manifesto for creative bureaucracy. I will come back to these issues very soon. Christina, let's move to Austria. Is coming from Felipe, is your policy good, just good, barely good, excellent? The floor is yours.
Well, I would say, of course, excellent, but I guess I'm quite biased. Well, to give you some insights about the Austrian agenda on creative industries, we have started already quite a while ago with supporting creative industries. One thing is that you have to, like, as a nation, I think we got to the term that it is very wise to use the creative industries as some kind of disruptive thinkers, especially nowadays that globalization and digitalization brings so many radical changes in society. So, and creative industries are not, we should not only support creative industries just to support the creative industries, but to use them for the wider economy, especially to use their transformative power for the wider economy. And that's something that we tried to do already more than, about 15 years now. But it always takes time, that we can tell you, because of course, what Felipe has already mentioned before, that, you have to raise awareness, and there's a lot of prejudices about creative industries that have to be, worked on. How we did it was, basically there's two big things that you can do in order to support them. One, of course, is monetary support. So that is something that we did already that we started in 2004. First of all, for them itself to develop new ideas, to be able to do that. But also one thing that has we have developed out of an European project, the European Creative Industries Alliance, where you and I have been part of as well. There we had the chance to install and test a pilot on creative industries vouchers, which is meant for SMEs from the wider economy to buy the service of a creative industries provider. And in order, the goal is to be able to test the benefits of working with creative industries, and then in the later stage to hire them also for bigger cooperations. And this kind of program we had, well, of course, within this European project, but we also had a national program running for several years. And the reason why we had that was to plant the seed in the minds also of other Austrian from companies from the wider economy, in order to learn about the benefits for working with creative industries. And the second big thing that could be very important, or that we thought was very important, is to have a strategic framework for that. So we have installed in 2016 a national creative industry strategy built on 3 pillars, which is innovation, transformation, and empowerment. And yeah, so one of the main goals is that we try to use the power of the transformative power of creative industries for the whole Austrian economy. And we do see quite some changes that happen in the past 15 years.
Christina, one of the big issues in how to get the creative industries policy running in a country is who is responsible for the strategy. In most of the countries, and most of the experience, if you look around the world and in Europe in particular, is that it has been originally the ministries of culture or departments of culture. And the struggle has been how to convince the people in the ministries of economy, export, trade, education, because money is usually there. Okay. Now you are a different case because you actually work in the business development branch. So maybe you can give us few hints or tips. If I see that many of us here in today's webinar are from the culture side. How to approach, what are the argumentation, or what is the road to actually get creative industries really rooted now within the trade or entrepreneurship policy?
Mm-hmm. Well, for us, first of all, the creative industries are located not in the Ministry of Culture, they are separated, and they are at the Ministry of Digital and Economic Affairs, so the economic ministry. You were asking, well, first of all, for the strategy, in order to keep it maintained, we have a board that is meeting regularly, and they are trying to always keep the strategy an active strategy. But because you were asking about one example, what you could do as a region, something that we did in Austria was, for example, to host a night of creative industries. It's like it was a fancy event to invite politicians, to invite also creative industries to present what they are doing, to give the politicians a stage, because politicians like to shine, and to plant also the idea into their minds of how the whole economy could shine if the cooperation between creative industries and the wider economy would be supported further.
But Christina, another follow-up just quickly, because I know that this is something that many people have on their mind. Now, people from the culture sectors or culture ministries, they work a lot to get creative industries accepted by the trade commissions or entrepreneurship development agencies. But there's always a risk attached to this. And the risk is that when the agenda is led by the trade or economic or entrepreneurship departments, as in your case, then they cherry pick. They like to deal with those parts of creative industries that that carry more of an economic value, design or games or architecture or others, and they might not understand or like or deal with what we would call arts, heritage related, music, etc. How have you solved that? Do you in Austria look at the creative industries in the whole sense of creative industries, or you have also cherry picked some parts of it?
Well, it is creative industries as a whole, but there is a big division between creative industries and cultural industries. So arts, most of them would be put to cultural industries. However, in Austria, it's not. In Austria, we have the cultural industries is a huge sector. You know, musicians, art, theaters. This is big in Austria. The main reason why we have separated the creative industries from the cultural industries is so that the creative industries wouldn't be outshined by the outshined by the cultural industries, because they're so big in Austria, and Austria is known as the country of culture. But this is probably a special case. So we actually have to look for take care of the creative industries more than for the cultural, because there's so much history for us for the cultural industries.
Very good. Thank you, Christina. Let's move on. Well, when I opened up my eyes this morning, it was snowing here in Estonia. Now we jump to Malta, where Tony has opened up officially the short season. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, I will not show you my shorts.
Please don't.
That I won't. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. 10 years ago is when I started working on the creative economy in Malta. And our story is very different because, unlike what Ragnar was saying in terms of usually the culture ministry tries to pitch to the finance ministry or economy, in our case, it was the other way around. So we had the person leading the finance ministry, the permanent secretary, who truly believed in the power of the creative economy. And he was the person who kind of kickstarted a conversation on the creative economy. So what really happened there, and back then I used to work at an art center. So what happened was a group of economists joined two cultural policy experts to devise a creative economy strategy. So suddenly my office shifted from working from an art center into a finance ministry. And that was kind of mind-blowing because you could start seeing, so what was really revealing to me was that I always thought that being involved in lobbying and championing the arts, required the necessary passion and arguments that the arts matter to the country and the nation. And again, back then it was still an arts argument, until you start understanding how other industries present themselves, from manufacturing industry, tourism industry, because of course I started meeting these people around the table. And actually I noticed how poor the culture and creative industries were in presenting their arguments. And that was primarily because of lack of data or lack of any arguments. And first and foremost, understanding or accepting the fact, and this is still challenged, that it is also part of an economic model. And 10 years down the line, I can reassure you that there is still resistance by quite a lot of people. So my first pointer is that probably you will find more resistance from within the sector than from outside the sectors, especially from those operating mainly within a strongly publicly funded, subsidized culture, where probably any economic argument is going to be seen as a threat. Are you suddenly asking us or telling us that we will no longer receive our yearly subsidy or a 3-year funding program because now we have to become a business? Or I'm a filmmaker, why should I be thinking of my profit and loss and entrepreneurship and working within a cluster and, thinking of anything else? So there is that kind of communication and also growth which requires from within the sector. So I would say, even before thinking of building any alliance with any political agenda, is actually building and growing that alliance from within and trying to understand who's in and kind of who's out and why. And probably in a culture like ours, or in a country like ours, where sectoral representation is very poor, so you wouldn't find industries coming together to lobby collectively, to advocate for that sector. So in that absence, in that vacuum, it is only public policy that can actually fill in that gap. So when we started working on the creative economy, actually took us around 3 years to work on the strategy. And of course, working from within the finance ministry gave us wonderful access to a whole economic department, to the National Statistics Office. And it was very interesting because once we had, I would say, 3 sentences which actually mattered, that spoke about the rate of the creative economy in terms of its contribution to the GDP or the gross value added, and the amount of people working within that sector. And where we took the plunge and said, okay, let's compare ourselves to other sectors. Then we started meaning business, because we started speaking the same language as any other sector. That's how tourism speaks, that's how manufacturing speaks, that's how, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we were working at a time when the conversations about the creative economy was kind of trending. Because political agendas, there's a trending going on there. So, from the noughties until 2010, still, it was kind of, especially within Europe, this kind of buzz. It became actually a buzzword. And although politicians were comfortably using creative industries, creative economy, loosely at times referring to cultural sectors, creative industries, we opted for an approach not to divide them in terms of our analysis. We wanted to look at the collective, because probably we knew that the economic or the most profitable area, when I'm talking about profit and the largest component of the creative economy, was more in the creative industries side, from design to software. But it was important for us to also elevate the status of the cultural industries, because that was also necessary. I would say 10 years down the line, probably we were more successful to elevate the status of the cultural sector than actually the creative industries. And I think that takes a longer time, because in a way we were trying to bypass the other steps. So, hand on heart, an art school is important for the creative industries. But in the absence of having an art school at a full-time tertiary educational level, you can't just bypass that and suddenly think that people are just going to create video games in a year or two. So we're kind of now filling in still those gaps, keeping in mind that ultimately political agendas tend to be short-term, unfortunately. So that is always the struggle of public policy, thinking long-term and having these short-term. So our immediate reaction to this was, first and foremost, having cross-sectoral policies. So, trying to intervene in policies of other ministries. And again, from some smaller, in a way, token probably projects to put like small funding programs within the office of the president to have the cultural sector, in this case, more present. To outright development policies. So for example, to give you an example now, like an example from the recent COVID measures, the culture and creative industries were one of the first sectors to be included in the list to be supported. Probably that happened because the National Development Agency, being part and parcel of this conversation, understood, or actually it came second nature to them, that this was a sector that was highly impacted by what's happening right now. Probably that conversation would have been very different 10 years ago. Probably we would have gone down the line of, probably we have some hobbyists here dabbling a bit with art rather than actually this is affecting people's lives. Of course, I can't qualify this. I would need to research that. But in my conversations with them, it wasn't a struggle. Far from it. Actually, it was practically already decided before even opening up a conversation. And my time is...
Yes, Rasmus.
Tony, I just would like to ask you, would you say a bit crude that the cultural industries are the heavily subsidized part of the creative industries?
It depends where. It depends where. In our case, yes. But I come from a school of thought in terms of thinking of culture as also public good. So I wouldn't say that that is a negative thing. Probably there are a lot of areas which require public subsidy if we believe that education and health and et cetera, is part of public good. If we have issues with that, then probably it's another argument.
And the cultural sector is part of the value chain of the creative industries.
Indeed,
yeah.
Indeed.
I'll give
Tony,
the word to Ragnar.
Yes, Tony, you brought a very important case that that has been highlighted many times around the world, and this is building strong alliance within the sector. That it is nothing makes it easier for the government to reject the thought of putting creative industries in the political agenda while the sector itself is infighting. So you have to avoid, battles in two fronts. But one question to you, especially because Malta is a very small place, and as an Estonian, you can't say that often that some other place is very small.
We like being small. We're okay with that.
The role of champions, the role of leaders. You were the one with your closest group within the government that actually made a change, an impact. Now, when you leave and you left the government system, who fills the hole there? What happened? Who takes it over? Did you build a strong follow-up that even when you left, the government kept on going? Or you see very clearly that with key people leaving the key positions, you have to start over and over again from the scratch?
There is always this risk. And hand on heart, I would say some things which we created in the strategy have disappeared because change of people, change of administration. Others have kept on going. So specific projects like the design cluster that kept on developing should open up later on this year. From a policy point of view, and again, back to perhaps what also Filippo was saying, some principles are now embedded in law. So for example, one of the first tasks there was to change the law of the Arts Council. So in our case, the first step was to address governance. And the Arts Council, so the traditional notion of an Arts Council, has also been given or was given a remit for the creative industries from a legal point of view. Now, of course, that changes, according to different strategies. So at times it's highlighted more than others. And this really depends on the specific leadership. It depends on the specific ministries involved. Probably at this time, I would say that the economy part or the industry part would tend to be more open, perhaps, and I kind of see this also in other countries where to be honest, I would opt to have an approach where the creative industries are included in all forms of development policies than other ways. I think I find that more effective.
Okay, very good. We chop down to even more south. We go to Kenya. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's a beautiful morning to see all of you. And thank you for this invitation. I'd like to start by acknowledging what Felipe, Tony have already created as a background for my presentation, with a few variations. So I work with Hiva Fund, which is an investment company born out of a filmmaking collective, multidisciplinary filmmaking collective. So my experiences cover both the practitioner's perspective and also a private sector perspective. So I've been practicing for the last 15 years in this space, beginning as a collective, now to an investment fund that has a participation of over 40 companies in 5 countries in one region. That is covering Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda. What is unique about this East Africa region is that it's very highly integrated. The median age is pretty much 19, which is quite young as opposed to most countries around the world. The economies are pretty small if you compare, say, to Western economy or to Asian economies, but there's a lot of private sector participation in the economy. And so our model pretty much is something between a think tank, because we do a lot of publications, research, guidelines, advisories for the 5 governments in the region. We also have a fund facility. So far, we have raised and made investments close to $4 million in the last 3 years in the creative and cultural industries. And we also consider ourselves as partners to government. But this has not always been the case. So I'd like to, just for understanding, also say what have we achieved through public partnerships, so that then I can go deeper into how we did it. At the national level, we've been able to, in the last 5 years, participate in numerous reforms. When Tony spoke about enshrining some of the innovations within law, is that we've understood that there's a very high turnover of officials who we've built in the past relationships with. And so we've moved towards looking at institutional and legal reforms as how to at least sustain some of our innovations. So we have had review of taxes as far as equipment and assets for creative and cultural industries are concerned, enshrining creative and cultural processes within arbitration and formal dispute resolution processes, so that then we can affect risk and how the creative industry risk is perceived. We've been able to support the development of taxes specifically earmarked for expenditure in the creative industries and in culture industries. In 2017, we worked for 2 years before with the government to create a tax on betting and gambling, which would raise close to $15 million every year. And about 30% of this is spent annually on arts and culture programs across the country. And that has sustained some financing regardless of the government of the day. We've been also able to influence the film policy, which has effect on making film and film production and digital and audiovisual content as part of mainstream economy. We've been able to reform the copyrights bill to be one of the most advanced in the region, to also look at intellectual property as part of monetization of culture, including the payments of royalties to musicians, using intangible assets as collateralization for finance, and so on and so forth. So we've tried to push a private sector agenda into culture, so that, and enshrining that into law. At programmatic level, we've been able to sign many cooperation agreements with government. The most recent one, and this was early 2019, the government handed over a market, public infrastructure, to the fund to be able to use our capacities to renovate and transform the fund, the market into public infrastructure for cultural production, for fashion, for innovation, for youth. And so our relationship is not just looking to lobby government's actions, but we are also looking to take on some public responsibilities and create them as centers of excellence, so that then if the government, if the president can launch these centers of excellence, it can start to show that we have new models for development. And through this, we've been able to take advantage of public priorities like employment creation, sustainable development, gender mainstreaming, these large national ambitions, to use those as to promote culture and creative industries, as opposed to just using a creative and cultural framework. What we've learned out of this is that first, we need to sustain our engagement. It's not one-off activities. It would be stemming across different government departments, different agendas, but being a focal point. And so we have employed, for the last 5 years, a government liaison office within our work that consistently invites, engages with government. We invite them to our parties, we go to their events, and we've built trust. And so as a result, whenever there is a conversation, we're always consulted. And this is an institutional innovation that we've had to employ. We've been able to convene with government conversations around creative finance, creative law, and creative activities. We've also seen that it's important for us to look at public sector priorities. We've gone through, Sustainable Development Goals, the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, and all these indicators that the government wants to look good. And we say, what can the creative industries chip off out of this national agenda? Sometimes it's leaning more towards the creative industries, and sometimes it leads more towards the cultural industries. And so, by and large, looking at public priorities as an entry point has always allowed us to be at the table consistently. And over time, there's now an adoption of language within government, and we've seen very direct, the language that we use to define culture and creative industries has systematically shifted into public language, into public sector language over the last few years. And finally, when it doesn't work, we've gone to court. We've used litigation as a strategy. So we realize big telcos and government are very reluctant to enforce copyright laws, which have a very direct implication to artists' revenues and incomes. We've seen a reluctance towards certain agendas that we have. And so we've always used litigation, active litigation in court, supporting artists to challenge certain sections of law, certain decisions through fair administration, through enforcing of fair administration rights, and so on and so forth, to use the stick end and also to use the carrot end.
Okay.
So this has been our approach, and we're innovating as we go.
Absolutely, fantastic overview. And I would just say that from Tony's intervention, building strong alliances, and what you mentioned, George, that you need to sustain that dialogue, that it's not a campaign, it's not one-off, and you have to put effort in building that relationship with the government so that they could see you as a reliable partner as well. Rasmus, I would like to go back to you for a second as well. I see that some questions are coming in also from participants, but also you have personally, not only as a chairman of the European Creative Industries Alliance formally, but also in Denmark, been very successful in pushing creative industries in the government agenda. Maybe a few pointers from you as well before we go to the questions.
Then it will be very brief. I think the big challenge is also to unite the creative sectors so that, because many of them have historically been supported by the Ministry of Culture, so they've been fighting against each other, trying to prove their worth and that music is more important than movies, etc. And I think really to have a united creative industries is one of the big challenges, both in Denmark and also elsewhere. Luckily, we have the Danish Arts Council and Artists Council that regroups 24 different organizations, from scriptwriters to musicians to choir participants. But that's not the full scope of the creatives. We have two questions. One is, they're both from German participants of German nationality. The first one is from Josefine Hage, and the other one is from Annette Rommel. And you're welcome to ask them yourself. Josefine, go ahead.
Sorry.
I have unmuted you.
You can. You can. Okay.
Absolutely.
Hello. Good morning from Leipzig in Germany. We are currently working within our network at promoting creative industries. It's a network of over 40 creative industries enthusiasts. I have to mention this term again. Thanks for that. And also within the network Creatives Germany, we are working on a sort of recovery plan for the cultural and creative industries at the moment, and collecting ideas collaboratively.
So
and
recovery after the unspeakable sea crisis. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Germany has a lot of immediate measures in place from which also cultural and creative entrepreneurs can profit from grants, credits, etc. But it's obvious that CCI is among the sectors that is, very heavily affected by the current crisis, and it won't be over after the summer. So.
Let's also take a question from Annette Rommel at the same time. I know you can see them, but Annette, if you want to voice your question.
Yes, hello to everyone. I have a question, especially because I'm a student and a younger participant, I would say, and starting to get in the work life and interest in the cultural industries. So my question was how to involve youth and gender equality in creative and cultural industry policies. So that would be interesting. So,
and since we have 6 minutes left, the speakers or the panelists are welcome to take either of the two questions, and what you feel most comfortable with to answer.
Rasmus, there's one more question, and
yes, there is. Sorry.
Let's ask that as well.
Specifically for Tony.
Yes.
And that is from Argiro Barata.
Yes.
So I can see you there. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm coming from Greece and actually from Thessaloniki, and right now we are building an alliance between the cultural sector, and we are already having this dispute about creative sector and cultural sector and how are we going to move forward. So in order to start preparing myself for these conversations, I was wondering if you have any practical advice on how actually to grow together, and what worked for Malta, and what do you have as an advice for me?
Since we have 5 minutes, I just recommend we will give now each one the last round of words. But these are the most open and friendly people on earth. So please, after this, find them on Facebook, write them, and start the conversation there directly as well. They are open for it. But please, let's go back to Felipe. Let's close this.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting insights from all the perspectives. one of the things we have done with policy in Colombia that I think answers kind of all of these questions is we have, I think, in a way, pioneered an approach of making transversal, I cannot say that word in English, transversalizing, culture as a tool for development. This is not as easy as, it is actually harder than to do than to say the word, but what I mean with this is one of the things we realized early on in the process of implementing policy is that it's not about having the creative industries with some sort of agency developing it somewhere in the government, and then you having to choose if it goes in trade, in digital transformation, or in culture. What we have done is we have created a council we call the National Orange Economic Council, and we have 12 national agencies there, including 7 ministries and 5 other agencies, including our National Service for Skills Training and Development, our financial institution for regional development, and our Statistics Authority, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of ICT, the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Labor. And what we do by this transversal approach is we start developing capabilities across the board in different agencies. So instead of having to think about how we replicate everything from within a ministry, what we do is we create alliances from the Ministry of Culture with the ICT Ministry so we can develop a digital agenda. We develop alliances between the Ministry of Culture and the Skills Development Agency so we can improve our ability to train people for work. We improve our relationships with the people in trade so we can also increase entrepreneurship. And we do so with not only the practical, quote unquote, elements of development, we also do that with the social and inclusive areas of the government. So we are working very close with the Women Empowerment Presidential Advisor, and also with the Presidential Advisor for the Inclusion in the Participation of People with Disabilities. And we are also working with the Youth Advisor. So we work with everybody that we need to work in order to make cultural development an integral element of our development model in Colombia.
Yeah. Christina, Tony. Christina, please.
Yep. So thanks again for inviting me. I will end with the 2 questions that were, and I will answer very briefly. The one question from Josephine in Austria, how we are trying to support creative industries, especially now after Corona. This is what I think that it was the question. We were actually having yesterday a meeting with the board, with the creative industries board. We're planning to enlarge in the funds that are dedicated for programs to support creative industries. So we will have bigger funds there probably from the next year or this year, next year. And about the gender, with our funds where we support creative industries, we give extra points to teams that are female or gender biased. So this is also a way to support teams that are either gender biased or female.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you again.
Thank you, Christina. Tony.
Okay, my reply to the question on how to bring the public and private together. I think the first task at hand was to bring them together on the same table. So working groups were created involving both the public sector and the private sector. Now, in the absence of having sectoral representation, such as associations or unions that represent sectors, that creates a bit of a problem. So in a way, in the absence of that, we had to kind of pinpoint kind of specific champions for subsectors. The second thing was from a public policy point of view, we've seen an increase in investment from public funding for culture and the creative industries from 0.4% in 2004 to now it's at 1.7% in terms of total public investment for the culture and creative industries. That came with a kind of agenda to strengthen the public sector, but also to make sure that this is also an investment for the private sector. So in a way, there was an understanding, thanks to the research we've done, that it is useless putting all your money into the public sector, because that comes with biases and bureaucracy, etc., etc. So the idea was to incentivize also the growth of the private sector, also keeping in mind that the scope of certain public institutions are also there to work and service, to be of service through taxpayers' money to other sectors. And the third point was also to develop new funding programs that would help the sector organize itself, but also instilling the idea of creative industry. So for example, a small creative industries platform program was created to support sector-led initiatives. Some are successful, others less successful. But I don't think there's one approach. It has to be a multilateral approach to do this.
Very good.
And thank
George.
you all.
George, would you like to also comment the last round?
Well, I'm quite excited to be part of this conversation. I've left my handles in the comment section so that I can be responsible with this 1 minute. Thank you. So anyone with direct questions to me, I'm happy to address them later, because I've seen the time is over.
Very good. Thank you.
And
thank you, everyone, as well. And I will give the floor back to Rasmus.
Thank you, Ragnar. Thank you, everyone. We will share with you, everyone that has signed up for this webinar will get an email with some links and also some LinkedIn information on the speakers. And also we will have a LinkedIn group for anyone interested in creative industries policy. I can encourage you also to tune in again next Wednesday, the 6th of May, for an hour on IP issues for creatives. And now here, the only thing that's left to say is to thank you to my dear co-host Ragnar Seal. Thank you also to Felipe, Christina, Tony, and George for contributing. And for everyone, thank you for tuning in. See you soon again. Have a good day.